Hey folks, welcome back to Icon Designs, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking you through the 10 shop upgrades that I've made recently. Some are small, some are large, but each project is designed to solve a certain problem in my shop. And these fall into one of three categories: shop organization, enhancing functionality, or improving safety. The two reasons I'm sharing this video with you today is to show how my shop is evolving as my channel grows, and to also give ideas to viewers who may be looking for solutions to similar problems that I have. I'll have links to most of the items referenced in this video in the description below if you want to explore an item further and improve your shop. All right, let's go. I'm going to break up the projects between the workshop upgrades and the CNC upgrades. Starting off with the workshop upgrades, and probably the most obvious, is the upgrades that I made to the worktop of my workbench. I added some T-track and also added some black melamine to the tabletop, mostly to make it an outfeed table for my new saw stop table, which was about 1.5 inches higher than my existing tabletop surface. So to make this, I had to add a 1/2 inch piece of plywood as an underlayment, so that when that 1/2 inch plywood plus the 3/4 inch melamine was added, it was the right height to serve as an outfeed table for my new table saw. Once the underlayment was installed, I used a flush trim router bit just to true it up with the existing tabletop surface on my workbench, and then I added the 3/4 inch melamine. Now this stuff is pretty awkward to work with because it's heavy and it's kind of bulky. So what I decided to do is add some T-track in between different sections of the melamine. Part of that is to add some clamp down capability with some of the T-track accessories that I already have, but it's also to break up the melamine into smaller sections so that if I ever need to replace it, I'm replacing smaller sections of melamine versus the entire thing. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 there. The total cost of this project was about $140. Most of the money was in the melamine. But the T-track you can buy on Amazon, and I'll have a link to that down below. And for those who have watched my recent video on building a crosscut sled, where I had 1 millimeter of clearance between the rails and the outfeed table, that was actually intentional, believe it or not. I took those measurements as a part of this project so that I would have enough clearance for those rails. My next project was focused on lumber organization, just to get stuff off the ground and onto the wall. Now, I installed this particular lumber rack about 4 months ago, but I never showed any footage of me actually installing it. So this one has been in my shop for quite a while. And this is designed to handle my larger lumber that's usually 8 to 10 feet long. But in more recent history, I've had a lot of offcuts and leftover scraps that just kind of get leaned up against the wall, and it crowds the garage pretty significantly. So one of the solutions I was looking for is to take that similar lumber rack idea, but put it in the wall space just above the garage so that I could utilize a space that would otherwise not have a purpose. That also gets the lumber off the ground and up on the wall, which helps with the shop organization. So that's what I did, and I installed them about 32 inches apart. Since the residential construction has 16-inch framing on center, I was able to put them about 32 inches apart, which is narrow enough to catch all of your scraps that are 3 feet and longer, which alleviated a lot of the stuff that was on the ground. Now the total project cost is $105, so it's not cheap, but it does free up a lot of space, and in a small shop, space comes at a premium. Now this next project was by far the most expensive, and it was the air filtration system that I got for the shop. Now, I know there's some folks out there that'll actually build these out of plywood and use a box fan with an air filter to circulate air that way. I looked at the cost of doing that versus the additional functionality that you get from a system like this, where you've got a 2-stage filtration system and you've got a remote with a timer feature. So for all those reasons, I decided to invest in this Wind system myself. Now, it does not come with any ceiling mounting hardware, so that's something that does have to be purchased additionally. I ended up finding some hooks and some carabiners from Amazon that worked really well and kept it at a very tight clearance height from the ceiling, which is what I wanted. Something I used to make the installation of these hooks easier was investing in a new stud finder. I had been using this old style stud finder for at least a decade, and I finally broke down and bought a newer style that's got 13 different sensors in it rather than just one. And as you're sliding it around, it can show you in real time where the stud is located, which makes it a lot easier to install stuff on ceilings and behind walls. So I wish I would have bought that a lot sooner. Now the total cost for this project was $340, which includes the wind filtration system and the ceiling mounting hardware, but does not include the stud finder that I talked about. It's an expensive upgrade for the shop, but I'm willing to invest that to protect the long-term health of my lungs. This next project is something I've had in my shop for a while, but I never talked about, and that's the lighting upgrades that I did about 4 months ago. I replaced the old fluorescent style lighting fixtures in my garage with some much brighter daytime LED light fixtures that put out a lot more light, which allows me to film in the evenings without having to use an additional light box. The installation took about 15 minutes per light and started off by shutting off the power at the circuit breaker and removing the protective covering on the light, and then removing the protective covering around the wiring, and then removing all the wiring and the fixture from the ceiling. Once that was removed, you pretty much do the exact opposite with the new light fixtures that you're trying to install. You install it to the ceiling, you start wiring it up, you put back on the protective covering, and it's good to go. So not only did I replace the existing fixtures with LEDs, but I also doubled the number of fixtures that are there total. So I went from having 2 light fixtures to 4, which adds a lot more light in the area. Now the total cost for this project was about $250, and all of that was just the cost of the actual fixtures themselves. Now this next project is probably the least practical of all the things that I did, but this was adding a sign to the shop to help with the branding of this channel. So I do a lot of filming in my workshop, both for Instagram, for TikTok, and mostly for YouTube. And I wanted to have something in the shop that had some Eigen Designs branding on it outside of just the CNC. I mean, obviously I've got logo inception happening right here where I've got the logo on the back and I'm cutting one on the plywood. But I did want to put something up on the wall from a branding standpoint. So I cut my logo on a pretty large piece of plywood, and then I came through with some black spray paint and just spray painted it all down. And I followed up with a little bit of fine grit sandpaper, and I just started sanding. And what I was trying to do is replicate the same coloring effect that I have on my logo, since that's very iconic to my branding that I've got on the channel. And the final product actually turned out pretty good. So good, in fact, that as soon as I was happy with it, I forced myself to put a little bit of finish lacquer on it so I wouldn't keep on sanding it and potentially ruin it. So once I had the finish on it, then I put a border around it and then hung it up on the wall. The total cost I'm saying is $35 because that's what it would cost to make if I were to go to the store and buy all these things. But I ended up using a lot of scrap materials that I had lying around the shop. So essentially, for no out-of-pocket dollars, I was able to add some nice branding to the shop and just personalize this space a little bit more. The last workshop project I did was to build some shelving to help organize some of the common paints and finishes that I use on projects on a regular basis. I had found that in the absence of having any organization for these things, they just ended up living in scattered areas across my shop, and the CNC makes it really convenient to design and build something like this and cut all the parts out and just assemble them together pretty quickly. I take some fine grit sandpaper and just do a once over on all the parts before final assembly. And then I take the backboard of the shelving unit and put it through the CNC just to put a nice label on the top so it adds a nice finishing touch to it. Once the lettering was engraved, I then took some black spray paint and just did a once over so that the lettering stands out once the painter's tape is removed. To install the shelving, I pre-marked a line where the stud was going to be and then pre-drilled some holes through the back and then secured it onto the wall using some coarse threaded screws. Once the shelving was secured to the wall, I then took my common paints and finishes and loaded them up into the new shelving. The total cost for something like this would be around $25, but again, similar to the shop sign, I had all this stuff lying around the shop, so it was no out-of-pocket expense for me personally. And for a little bit of effort, it sure does clean up this space really nicely. Most of the CNC upgrades are on the smaller side and enhance the organization of the things that are required to use the CNC. This first project, for example, is a magnetic tool holder that holds the bits and the tools commonly needed when using the CNC. Having a dedicated spot for these commonly used items saves a ton of time, especially when you can just grab it off the wall and continue using it. The total cost for this was only $20, and this particular strip is made by Rockler. Now these next three items are all 3D printed items from an Etsy store called Rowdy Roman, and I'm not affiliated with him, but I just really like his products. This first item is a holder for your touch probe, which you're constantly using, but the wires can often get in the way, so this just gives it a dedicated place for it to live and a way to keep the cords out of harm's way. It's only $17 and even sells the plans if you have a 3D printer for a fraction of that, so you can build it yourself. Next up is a holder for the remote control for the CNC. I found that I didn't have a really good place to put this, and I was often putting it on top of the enclosure. And because I have a lid that kind of blocks the way, it was just kind of an awkward place to put it. And this holder gives it a dedicated place to live, and so I always know where my remote is. Again, the total cost for this is $13, but if you buy the digital plans and build it yourself using a 3D printer, it's a fraction of that. This last CNC project is the only one that really adds additional functionality because it is a webcam mounting system for the OneFinity, which elevates the webcam and gives you a nice perspective of what you're cutting. And you're able to view this webcam footage through the browser using the IP address for your particular machine. This means that I can watch live streaming footage of what my CNC is doing from the comfort of my desktop, which allows me to spend more time on Dude Sawdust's YouTube page, frantically hitting the refresh button, waiting for his newest video to drop. The total cost for this project is $90. $60 of that is the webcam, and $30 of that is the mounting system that you can get from Rowdy Roman. So those are the 10 upgrades that I've done to my shop recently, and hopefully you've seen something today that can help you organize your shop better, work more effectively, or even better, work safer. And if you like this type of content, you want me to share the journey of my shop evolution as my channel continues to grow, give me a thumbs up. And if you didn't like this content, give me a big old thumbs down. I just ask that if you do give me a thumbs down, leave a comment as to why, so that I can continue to refine my channel and the content that I produce. And for those who have been trolling my Instagram, I got a really cool video coming up in the next week, so stay tuned and I'll see you on the next one.